Here we go. Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the Surplus Properties Facilities Advisory Committee meeting. I am Susan Warnick. I am the vice chair of this committee, and I'm filling in tonight for Ross Millerick, who is the chair and could not be here with us. So we first wanted to note to you all that this meeting is being broadcasted on NUSD's YouTube channel. The broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. If you'd like to make a public comment on an item on the agenda or not on the agenda, please see staff at the side table for a public comment card. Typically, we would do a roll call on the city council, but apparently we're doing a visual one. And as I said, the only member missing this evening is Ross Millerick. So moving right along on our agenda, the next item is approval of the agenda, and I do need a motion and a second. Okay, so motion made by Dean Moser and seconded by Heather. Who was it? Oh, I thought it was. Oh, did you say it? I seconded it. You seconded it. Okay, and not Heather. You tried, and it just didn't happen. Okay, it's okay. We're all volunteers. And I think Ellen has something to share.
Just to remind you that you need to press the button to be on the YouTube channel. So if you're going to first or second or make a motion or anything, please just press the button and say what you need to say.
The next item on the agenda is public comment. This would be public comment for items not on the agenda. I don't see any cards, so we will move right along. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of our meeting of January 15th. If I could get a motion and a second.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay, and who said that? Dale?
Dale.
Okay, Dale Klein.
A second.
And a second from Heather Bettini. And at this point, we're going to move along with the agenda. Our first item is parcel reports, and I'm going to pass it off to Derek Nell.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thanks again for serving on our committee. Really appreciate the time that you're putting in here. I'm going to start out with the a report on the two parcels that are under consideration, and will be followed up by our Chief Financial Officer, Josh, who will give us some information on enrollment projections. So the first parcel is the Meadow Park Annex. And it's called the Annex because it was added to the Hamilton campus during a transfer between the U.S. government and the San Jose Unified School District. So essentially, we acquired these properties in 1951 when the U.S. Air Force conveyed both parcels to the San Jose District, which was the school district that preceded the Novato Unified School District, or I should say Novato was in existence at that time, and they merged later on. It's currently being occupied by Community Action Marin, which operates the Head Start Children's Center in Portables, and the Portables actually belong to them, and they have a lease with us that's running probably about 6 years, a little more than 6 years left on that lease. And of course, we're not going to do anything that's going to displace them long term, so we will find a solution if need be for them. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and proceed with hopefully declaring the property as surplus, as it's never going to be needed for additional school site. What's sort of interesting about this part, where you see sort of a division line down the middle, is we were thinking that we would do a boundary line adjustment to combine the lower parcel with parts of the Hamilton K-8 campus, which is just north of it. So that sort of explains the white line, the division line will end up being moving north towards the campus itself. Combined, it's about 3.7 acres, and it's currently zoned as a community facilities, public utilities, and civic use. which would require us to change the zoning if we were going to do for whatever it gets used for in the future. But mixed use, residential mixed use is allowed. So that's the Meadow Park Annex property. And this is just an overall view of the K-8 campus running down to the bottom photo, which shows the area that has the portables. And then I've got a survey map there from 2002 to kind of give you an idea of the shape and size of those two parcels. Any questions at this point, I guess?
Well,
Yep.
on the little parcel at the end, that's the parcel we're talking about?
That's correct.
Okay.
Derek, is it the property rented to Community Action Marin?
That's correct. We leased it to them. Actually, back in the 90s, there used to be some buildings on the site that they leased from us that were conveyed to us by the Air Force. They caught fire and burned down, and basically at that time they were able to obtain some funding to purchase the portables in exchange for a 25-year lease with the district that has approximately 6 years left to go on it.
If all goes according to plan, Derek, and you mentioned that we're going to honor the lease, does that mean they would be moved to a different location that's available?
Yes, we will. There's a lot of ideas as to what would happen, and there has been some informal conversations to date about what would happen. But what's more important is that the district has made assurances that we're not just going to kick them out without having a solution. Even at the end of their normal lease term, we would either extend that or we would help them find another location.
And Derek, could you please clarify that what we're talking about is that in the next steps or next iterations, by no means the committee certifying this as a surplus property would do anything to kick them off of that space.
And that's a good point, just to emphasize, by declaring the property surplus doesn't force us to do anything. This committee itself is just sort of identifying these properties as no longer needed for their original intended use, which was the construction of a school. And based on the enrollment trends we're going to see and the fact that we've had the property since 1951 and we've never had the need for expansion or to use it for a school. And by declaring it surplus property, we'll then enter into another phase where decisions will be made as to what to do with it and the current tenants. So I'm going to move on to the next property. This is the San Andreas parcels. So we've had this property since 1967, and when the developer who built San Marin actually started that development in 1964, at that time it was thought that the baby boom generation would continue to grow and there'd be a high level of ongoing population growth. So as a condition of the development of San Marin, the school district and the city were given these two parcels, and the 21 parcel is approximately the size of for a middle school use. In that, what happened was obviously is that the population did not continue to grow at an exponential rate, and the school district has never needed it for anything other than some light storage from time to time. And the same thing goes for the city. They've never needed it for a park as well. So moving forward, the idea might be that, again, this is nothing to, in the future use, it would combine it with the city parcel, helping to give us some access to the San Marin Boulevard. And it's basically 21 acres, 21.6 acres belong to the school district, and 4.4 acres belong to the city. It's currently, general plan is medium density detached residential use, and it's a planned PD development, which essentially means that it's a more of a blank slate kind of a concept in the housing element or in the general plan, that it would be used as an integrated neighborhood use for, that was convenient to the public and other retail services. And again, those types of things how we use it in the future would be changed. But for now, that's the current zoning. This is just an overview of the site. It's a fairly large site, especially for Marin County. And so San Marin Boulevard running across the top, and then San Andreas is over on the left, which is also a divided boulevard. So do you have any questions about this parcel?
I have some questions and comments, I guess. Looking at the numbers for the proposed residential development that was put together, San Ramon would have about 425 new students, but they have an extra capacity of 46, which would leave 379 students that didn't have a place to go. But I don't think you build a school for 379 kids. Yeah. So from that standpoint, there doesn't appear to be a need relative to students. But I have a question: what if these parcels are sold? Are the funds going to be used for the workforce housing? That'd be my one question. And then the second question would be that this parcel is in the middle of a whole residential area, and I don't know that we'd want a builder's remedy to go there. So is there a way that the parcel can be designed so that it fits the neighborhood?
So the two the questions that you're basically asking, we're going to get into the enrollment projections and how that's turning out. That's a real gradual growth, and that we're in a position to handle any projected growth that may occur over the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to hear from Josh shortly on that. And then when it comes to the final use, I think it's probably, since our goal is not really to determine what the final outcome will be, though I would expect that all of you would probably participate at some level, but that's going to be like a next process step. But going forward, I think you're going to, you can have some comfort in thinking that the school district, the school board isn't going to be doing anything that would be completely out of place or unacceptable to this neighborhood. However, doing nothing with it is not acceptable either.
And Derek, I can answer the question about like the funds.
Yeah.
What our plan or what the plan would be, like we said, hasn't been decided. However, the way that the law is written is that if we were to sell that land, that money would have to be for the purchase of long-term assets. So it could not be used for operations. In other words, we wouldn't sell that, increase salaries, and then the money, poof, it's gone. It would have to be utilized for something like future housing, for upgrading, renovating, modernizing our current facilities, things like that. That's the only thing allowable for when you sell long-term assets. You have to use them to purchase long-term assets.
Question, Derek?
Yeah, which is really an important point that people understand that any long-term lease or capital that comes from the sale of this property would have to go back into facility use here.
Yeah, Derek, in the short run, assuming the committee, maybe I shouldn't assume, but if we're the committee to make this surplus property, is there a plan in place in the short run to let these neighbors know that that's happened?
To a certain degree, that I would say that a lot of the neighborhood already knows through communications that have been ongoing for the last year and a half. There's been efforts to publish notifications in the San Marin Homeowners Association, though I think it's called the San Marin Improvement Club.
San Marin Improvement Association.
Yeah, San Marin Improvement Association, Sylvia Berry, who's the current president of that. So again, once the properties are declared surplus, we would start a process to sort of come up with ideas with what to do with it, and that in itself would be extensive and would include a lot of community input and outreach. and without a doubt would include a great deal of the community's input because of their proximity.
Derek, if I may. So just to be clear, it's my understanding that the purpose of this group is to simply identify these as surplus properties. And beyond that, those questions will be answered separately.
That is correct. We are following strict procedural requirements set forth by the state of California, explained to us at the last meeting by our attorney Jim here about us having to form this committee and have these meetings, and it's specifically to identify them as surplus, meaning we won't need them for future school sites.
Derek, question?
Yes.
So this site seems to be in close proximity to San Ramon Elementary, and I was just curious, were both of those sites conveyed at the same time by the same developer, or was this earmarked to be a junior high? What was the overall plan for this site?
Yeah, there was actually two, there's actually I think San Ramon was at a slightly different period, but no, not San Ramon, Pleasant Valley. But San Ramon, and then I forget the name of it, but we had an elementary school site that was never developed very close to this site that's now housing San Carlos, I want to call it.
It was a 10-acre site at the top
Right.
of San Carlos, and that sold
The district sold that.
25 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Ross were here, he could tell us, because I think he was on the board right after it was sold.
And I was involved.
So that's an example of sites that were conveyed to the district by the developer in expectation of exponential population growth that didn't happen. So that site was sold 35 to 40 years ago. John.
Derek, at the last meeting, we asked a question about whether we could entitle it before it was declared surplus. And it seems that, I mean, Ross and others at the board meetings have mentioned that in the past we've sold property that wasn't as entitled, and we didn't make as much money on it because of it. What's to prevent it if we declare they're just say, rubber stamp it, okay, it's surplus? What's to prevent the board or anybody else coming along later and saying, okay, it's an emergency, we just got to sell anything we can and
Right.
get whatever price we can?
So the sequencing is still the same. What happened 40 years ago was that the school district was in financial dire need. I think we've all maybe not heard Ross's story of the laminate beams that were failing at San Ramon, and they needed money, and they needed money fast. So they put that site up for sale as is. After a process of declaring it surplus, we're going to follow the same sequencing. We're going to declare it as surplus, and then we would begin a process of deciding what to do with it, which would include the kind of entitlements that we might pursue. So we would not sell it as is right away. We're not in that situation. We're in a situation where we have time to think about it and come up with what will work best for the district and the surrounding neighborhood, which would include entitling it.
I just want to clarify something, though. Even if you entitle a piece of property, it does not guarantee that that's the project that will get built on that property. So what I have concerns about, and we're jumping, way ahead here, but if you do entitle a piece of property, it sends a message to the public that, we're getting 125 homes. But state legislation is so intense right now in terms of really pushing high-density housing. And they're removing all obstacles to build it, that, I would just caution the district as a whole, as you move forward, to be completely transparent. This is Peeney Hardware is a perfect example. We had a completely entitled project on that site, 30-something units of housing, retail on the bottom. The numbers didn't pencil out. They sold the project, and now we're faced with 5 stories. Just a completely different project. So it's tough. People get entitlement confused with permitted, and it's completely different. And but I think that's important. Even zoning with state legislation now, the zoning can be changed, the use can be changed. It's very frustrating. But I just wanted to add that.
Comment on that real quick. I've heard of some sellers recording deed restrictions before they pass title to a buyer, and it seems to have a little bit more bite. And I'm just curious, have you seen that? Is that an option here for the district to consider?
I haven't seen that, and I just wonder in terms of my understanding of legislation at the state level, they're doing anything and everything to make sure that nothing gets in the way of building affordable housing. So they're removing the obstacles. The builder, if you want to come in with 100% affordable, it's all in the builder's lap and not the city's, unfortunately.
So I'm just going to sort of take it back and say, again, this is all generalized, good information to share, and I think it's important that you guys have as much of this information at this point as possible, but it's really hard to say for sure, what we're going to do. So I have to sort of come back to the default that the district, the direction is basically to maintain control and to do what we can to make it fit the neighborhood. So essentially, there are, I forget the acronym right now, but there are, and I wouldn't describe it exactly that you put restrictions on the title to control, but you can come up, there are certain kinds of developments that make it more difficult to do something different. In fact, maybe going forward, it's going to be there'll be more community involvement, and maybe the district ends up being the developer in order to control it. And so that's things like what Susan's suggestion could happen.
Derek?
I was just going to finish by saying that Peeney story, there was a lot of neighborhood opposition to that, which made it more expensive to develop. And then because of that developer pulled out, and now you're stuck with the ministerial approval of a very high density building without parking. So in other words, they had a nice development. They said no to that, and then they got something much worse. So I'm just trying to let you guys know that it's the school district who's going to be leading the development of these parcels, and we live here too, and we care about our communities and our neighborhoods. So whatever is done, in the end, is likely to be the best solution as opposed to turning it over to a developer. All right, somebody else had a question.
Derek, I had one, thank you. Just a point of clarification. The yellow represents 4 acres owned by
The city.
the city.
Currently designated to be a park. And then the city just completed a park study at the end of last year, and their outcome was to have no more parks, but just basically to do a better job of taking care of the parks that they have. So they have no current interest in having this become a park, but that isn't to say that there couldn't be turned into some kind of common use area or a shared open space or something along those lines.
So that's not being considered for development commensurate with whatever decision the board makes. In other words, the city of Novato isn't waiting for a decision to be made about the parcel next to it, right?
They're not waiting. They're anxious to hear if we're going to have plans or not. But I'm just citing from their public report, and Susan was on the council at the time when the master plan for parks in the city of Novato was decided upon, and the decision was not to add any parks, but to do a better job of taking care of the ones that they had. So I hope that's about all I can answer to that at this point. And until we have more ideas at this point, they don't want a park, and we don't need a school. Right. Okay, so last question, and then we're going to get into enrollment, which is like more fun than this.
Okay, I might be hitting that part. You can tell me if I am when I get there, but I don't know, the San Ramon is a K-5.
San Ramon is a K-5, yes.
Okay, so then where do they go? Because I don't know this area. Do they then go to Sinaloa, 6 to 8?
Most of them, yes.
Is that right? And then they go to
San Marin High. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So now I'm going to introduce our Chief Financial Officer to give us some update on our enrollment trends, and I think you're going to switch a slide over. Or?
Hello, committee. And yes, I'm Joshua Braff, Chief Financial Officer, and today we're going to talk about the enrollment projections that we use internally. So there's a printout for you on your table, and we added it to the online docket so that anyone watching online can download it as well. But we printed it out so it's not in your presentation packet. It's colored blue. All the information is colored blue, and it's on a white piece of paper. Oh, I already have it open. That's why it's not opening. Okay, and it looks like this. So on that document there, that is a sort of like the published report of this. And that is our enrollment numbers, all the way going back to 16, 17. Just one point of clarification, because you might be looking at that and say, what does that mean? On the left-hand side, you're seeing all of our different locations. So you've got, Hamilton, Loma Verde. You come to a couple that you might not be familiar with. Marin Oaks and Nova are both at our Hill Education Center. NPS stands for non-public school. So those are students that are not housed on any of our campuses, but they are students who are within our enrollment area and we are responsible for. But they usually are within or almost exclusively within the special education system, and they go to a much more specialized program that we don't offer in-house. And then SDC is sort of that in between. So those are special education students, but they are housed at one of our campuses. However, they might not be in their enrollment area. So they because we have to sort of bring the students together to get that programming, and it is highly specialized, they might be pooled at one specific campus. So before 24, 25, basically before I started doing the numbers, those students are within wherever they were originally enrolled from. So that's why on this document here you see asterisk, asterisk, asterisk as it goes across. That's just they're not broken out. After that, I started breaking them out so that we could talk about them as we needed to internally when we were looking at enrollment numbers. We hold numbers going. Go ahead.
Can you give an example of, like a hypothetical example of what you're talking about with the SDC?
Yeah. So we have a community, not community. C stands for Counseling Enriched Curriculum, Counseling Enriched Classroom, the CEC. That currently is on our Marin Oaks campus or on Hill Education Center. The kids that go there are kids who might be overstimulated by a larger classroom setting, overstimulated by a larger campus setting. The kids that go there, well, first of all, Marin Oaks doesn't have its own enrollment area, but those kids might live in the Novato high school enrollment area or the San Marin area. We basically pull those kids out of that area and put them into a classroom that is going to hopefully be much better for them. And that would be an example of why, we wouldn't count them as a Novato high school student because they don't attend Novato high school. But then also to do their enrollment within itself and say SDC and do its own enrollment as an enrollment area would also not be true. The high schools do have some on their own campuses, but we also have them not every elementary school has them. So really in the elementary school enrollment areas is where it matters most. The Nova, Marin Oaks, SDC, and NPS are all held flat. That is never true. It's never exactly the same each year, but the whole point is that those kids would come from a different enrollment area. So we hold them flat because anytime they came back to one of our campuses or came from one of our campuses, those kids are already counted somewhere else, right? This is all trend data. So what it does not take into account is any sort of new constructions. It doesn't take into account like the machinations of other systems that go on that affect it. But what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is telling you how we get these numbers, so that there's a bit of faith in where this comes from. Because what we see on the trend down below is this giant growth. It shoots up. And well, why is that? Well, there's a couple different reasons. So now this is a living document, so it is not a published report, and that's why you don't have a copy of it. Also, it'd be 40 pages long. But in each section here, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can see it up here. In each section, we have it for every single school. So it's highlighted Loma Verde. We have it for each year. Gets broken out. And I hold 8 years worth of data at any given time. So next year, when we're projecting for 26-27, I'll roll everything down. Over here is the total of each of those classes, and then the change from the previous year. I do an 8-year average, the number, 4-year average, and a 2-year average, and then an 8-year average, 4-year average, and 2-year average of percentage. All of that goes into weight more current data, heavier than older data. Because 2 is reflected in 4 and 8, 4 is reflected in 8, and then 8 is reflected once, right? If you didn't get that, that's okay. It's a stats thing. Don't worry. It's fine. Then down here, 25, 26, 27, 27, 28, here's our 5 years of projections, right? What is happening here? Well, each year you go out, the less and less accurate it becomes, right? So number one, we don't budget for 5 years out. We budget. I'm throwing up quotes for anyone that's listening on audio only. We budget for 5 years out. But the standard for school budgeting is 3 years. So our multi-year projection is 3 years. That is what is in all of our published reports. That is what's required by the state. So we do that. So 3 years out, relatively accurate. 5 years out, you're starting to really get into a guess at that point. But I do want to show you something important. Number one, why we're seeing such large growth and how that could actually be real. And something that is not reflected in this numbers, but is definitely going to influence because it's happening right now. And so, of course, we don't have it in trend data because it's current year happening, but we will see it in the long term. Why we believe that this is actually real. Well, I'm going to go down to, as we go through, this is, of course, all of our schools here. But as we go down to the middle school, what we see here is San Jose. This is real. This is accurate numbers for this year. So these are real numbers, okay? These are not projections. We're in the 24-25 school year. That's currently this year. Right now, we see that the incoming, so these are 5th graders this year, incoming into 6th grade next year, is 270. Last year, that was 216, and the years before that, 176, 176. We haven't seen a 270. So what we're actually seeing is that the middle school is going to start to grow. Well, then you put that out 5 years, and we're starting to see that all of the numbers at the middle school and the high school are starting to replace the larger classes that just left. So we had a very large senior class last year. We have a smaller than that incoming 9th grade class. Then the year prior to that was the same thing, a larger than the incoming 9th grade class left as seniors. Now we're starting to see that replaced. We're starting to see it go in the opposite direction, a larger incoming 9th grade class, a larger incoming 6th grade class than before. Now, is that going to carry on forever? Hard to tell. Probably not. While this kind of shows a line that goes like this, the real line is like this, right? And it's right now trending up, but that's the part that we have to remember is that this is highly based on or highly weighted to current things that are going on, which is coming out of COVID, right? COVID, huge drop. Now coming out of it, we're starting to gain some students back and it's growing. But does that mean that that's the long-term trend? Probably not. And I highlighted this section right here so that we can talk about that. So this is for San Jose Middle School, and this is the averages for San Jose Middle School. So one of the feeder schools for San Jose is Hamilton. A little weird, right? Because Hamilton has a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But not every single student at Hamilton goes to the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at Hamilton. Some of them go to San Jose. So we have that reflected in numbers, but that is also reflected in the numbers in all of them. So it is accurate, right? We're keeping parity. We don't want to use data for 1 year and not use it for another year. So that's in there for all of those years. So that's nothing new. But that's why we see this big giant drop in numbers, which is the change from this 5th grade class becoming this 6th grade class, right? And that is the change from this 5th grade class of 216, I'm looking at it right here, 216 becoming 170. Where's that drop? Well, most of those students do stay at Hamilton, right? So it's actually a decline in the available 5th graders going into 6th grade. But that's not the important part. That part makes sense. Most of the kids stay at Hamilton that are going to Hamilton. Okay, you're going to drop from that going to San Jose, because we're talking about San Jose right now. But look at these numbers. That is growth. That is growth from 6th grade to 7th grade. And then this is growth from 7th grade to 8th grade. Where do all those kids come from? Where do all of a sudden they just show up? Well, I can answer for the last couple years. Those have been newcomers. Those have been newcomers. So newcomers are the group of students that could either be new to the country, new to California, or new to Novato. They're coming in and most likely have not already been, these aren't transfer students. These are going to be students that are new to our school system. Because of current administration, we don't expect to see these kinds of numbers coming in the future. Now, for the future forever, or for the future for the next 4 years, or for the future for just a year, and then it returns to normal, of course, we don't know. Nobody knows. But this is something that is making the future of these projections look less and less accurate for such a giant growth, because this is heavily embedded in these numbers. The other thing that we wanted to kind of focus on, and it's not really shown in here because it does taper off, is that this big growth here and just these last two numbers heavily take in a lot of assumptions of a growth staying high, because it's kind of like a cascading effect. It's a positive, well then a positive and a positive as it continues to take those numbers and use them as the percentage growth to then build. But what we do see is that 7591 or 7600 is about the max, because at that point we're talking about a full TK load and a full kindergarten load moving through the system, and now them just sort of staying the way they are forever, which is really close or at the numbers that we saw back in 2016-17, 2017-18, which our school system was obviously able to handle class sizes of, or class loads of that amount. So before I pass this back to Derek, any questions from the panel other than what did you just say?
Josh, can you talk a little bit more about TK and kindergarten growth, TK, pre-K?
Yeah.
And what's from the state, what's motivating those increases? And when you say tops out, TK will top out at a certain, what percentage of TK children in Novato would be then attending?
Yeah. So we don't know, of course, the entirety of how many students are out there that we're not currently housing, or what students are on the way, right? How many 1-year-old, 2-year-olds are out there? How many, pregnancies are going on? We don't have those kind of accurate numbers, but what we do have is kindergarten numbers. And kindergarten numbers is sort of built in to all of us that were educated in California or working educated in California, because kindergarten has been around for a really long time. It is still state law that parents do not have to register their children for school until their children are 6, which is 1st grade. Kindergarten is still optional, but it doesn't feel optional because it's been around for so long. So for the most part, we're getting all of the kindergartners that are out there. Like, we can kind of hold that as at least some semblance of truth. We're getting all the kindergartners. So what we look at is, well, okay, if kindergarten was 500 students this year and TKers was 300 students, there are 200 students that are out there running around that are not yet within our system because TK is so new. It is not seen as the norm, and maybe 25 years from now it will be. But for right now, it is new, and not every parent is taking advantage of it. Not every parent wants to take advantage of it. So when I'm saying that it tops out, I'm saying that the TK numbers match the kindergarten numbers so that it's just flat. Those TKers become kindergartners, those kindergartners become first graders, and so on and so forth. And then they move through our entire system. Right now with the legislature, the big change is that next year, the turning 4 birth date needs to be September 1st. So that is the last change, or at least the last proposed change. I guess we can't ever be sure. But for right now, that means that all 4-year-olds will be allowed to register for school in TK. After that, there is no new jump in groups of students that could be there. So going into this year, we're looking at that there's 3/4 of the year are allowed to come. Next year, it will be the whole 4-year-old year. You think of it in this term, it's about a 33% increase, right? You went from 3/4 to 4. So it's a 33% increase in potential population. We've seen about 100 new students register. We have about 200 students this year. So we're really trending along that line for it to be true. But what we still see is that our kindergarten numbers are much higher. So will we ever have TK numbers match kindergarten numbers? Unknown, yet to be seen, right? I think TK has to be around long enough for people to have a supreme level of comfort with it. But what we are seeing is that is the max that it can go to, because I don't think we're ever going to have more TKers and less kindergartners. Like, those numbers should go up like this.
Question, Josh? Over here. If we were to zoom out on this view and, look into the history, is it safe to assume the 16-17 year is the high water mark in terms of enrollment, or was it ever higher in our past?
I do know that it was higher than that, but I believe it was higher than that quite a while before. So it was like that was the high water mark of the current era. I do know that there was a time when there was like 9,000 students, but this was a time in the far past. I think in the current era, like 7,600 was a top.
And that was presumably with our existing facilities, right? We didn't. So
yeah, there's been some new buildings built, but there's definitely been no school built since 16-17.
Thanks.
In 16-17, we didn't have TK. So looking at the elementary school campuses, do we have any data that would help us understand which ones may have been or might be negatively impacted in the future if we needed additional classrooms because we're expanding the number of students served?
Yeah, actually, an interesting fact about that, I think, and I was talking with Derek about this earlier today, is that if you look at the layout of our elementary school campuses, what they are not in need of is more space. So they have huge, huge, huge plots of land with a small footprint on them. Now, of course, I don't want to take all of their play yard and turn it into building, right? That's horrible. But to put in another, 4 rooms or 2 portables or 3 portables or do things like that, there is plenty of opportunity on our campuses to do that as is before we're ever encroaching on the idea of leveling a whole entire area or play field. I think of San Ramon specifically, has like a 3-acre yard. That's you use that for ranching, right? And these kids are out there, they've got way more space than they're ever going to need. So there's a lot of opportunity on our elementary school campuses, but that is the truth. Right now, we are butting up against that with TK specifically, but it's also because lower class sizes in TK and facilities needs specialized bathrooms. So you just can't put them anywhere on the campus. So the facility needs is also a little bit more of a specific question, much more than a how many classrooms you have could answer.
Could you expand that in terms of the middle schools then? Because when we switched Hill over to accommodate special programs, we eliminated one of our middle schools, and I understand there may have been challenges at the existing middle schools in terms of increased population.
Yeah, and right now at our high schools, so specifically Novato High School is down from their historical highs or even averages, really. Same thing with Sinaloa.
Okay.
San Jose is trending up. San Jose, a little kind of cramped for space, but Sinaloa has much more space, looking just at student numbers, right? And then same sort of thing for Novato High versus San Marin. What we're seeing in the trending, though, and because of the feeder schools, so the feeder school populations of the elementary schools going into the middle and then the middle going into the high, we actually see that reverting. And Novato High School becoming bigger again, and San Marin sort of holding flat, and Sinaloa kind of reaching a more of a middle number, which then means that we would probably have a flip-flop 5 to 7 more years out from that.
And there's adequate land then at the middle school and high school level to expand by adding portables if we need to?
Yes, if we needed to. I think what I'm saying is that, especially like at Novato High School, they're down around 300 students from their highs, right? I think that we have a lot of growth at those levels before it's even a discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Josh, can I just return to the TK question? Because I know that's a big area of growth for us. And we, at one point, a few years ago, we had over at one of our potential sites at Hamilton, not this site, but just next to the South Novato Library, we had early intervention, nursery school out there. And as I recall, the problem with that site was it's sort of isolated, right? And I think at the elementary level, and maybe even more so at the nursery school level, parents want their kids pretty close at hand when they're picking them up and all. Have we seen that, have we seen more growth in TK proportionally since early intervention was moved over to Rancho, moved closer to housing? I mean, we want to encourage these neighborhoods that we're developing, right, to be neighborhoods that attract families and that attract kids, right? So I think their proximity to a place where your young children are going to be educated, even at nursery school level, would be a key factor.
Yeah, I think I'll add a little bit of clarification to that. So EI is a special education program, is federally mandated under the IDEA, and that is for 3 to 4 year. Well, TK can be involved in that in a little bit. It's sort of in flux, but TK is a California thing, right? And it is, think of it like kindergarten, but for 4-year-olds. It is transitional kindergarten. So we have a TK at every single one of our elementary sites. I should say a TK program, because it can be multiple classrooms, but we have TK at every single elementary. EI, or early intervention as it is called, that can be specialized. And the same way we talked about SDC classes, EI can be moved. It does not have to be on a specific campus. It does not have to be on every campus. Technically, those kids are not actually enrolled for purposes of enrollment in ADA. They do not show up on here because as of right now, we only talk about 4-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And EI can be younger than that. And we also have, under the IDEA, we serve students that are 18 to 22 if they're in special education. They do not show up on this. But they don't really come into the conversation of housing on a specific campus because they, as a program, can be moved to each campus. And I do, of course, understand that, depending on where it gets housed, parents could find a lot of frustration in that. But it is sort of a different conversation because TK has to be on the campus. EI doesn't have to be on any specific campus. And EI is not a competitor to TK. So we wouldn't see if we did something wonderful and great with EI that we would see TK numbers grow because they are sort of One is very specialized, and now one is open to all families. I think.
Thank you. I wanted to share a reflection as both a leader at Community Action Marin that offers infant toddler care, preschool, and aftercare, and a parent of preschoolers and a first grader at NUSD. TK isn't the right choice for every family. It's wonderful to have the access and the expansion, but for those families who are fortunate enough to receive a subsidy or free preschool, it would not behoove them because it ends at 12:40. I can't remember anymore. And with their preschool, they get care through the rest of the day, right? So that's really an important consideration. And then also the level of attention that you would get in a preschool versus TK, which is improving. But for my example, my son went to TK and I kept my daughter in preschool, and she'll enter kindergarten this year. So I've done both ways. And I think it's a personal decision. More access and opportunity is always good. But I want to caution us to try to push families into TK if it may not be the right choice for them.
Josh, I'm just curious if you're tracking data around some of our school choice options. So, and if there's any value to it, because it's not huge numbers, but things like MSA, our dual language immersion program, the charter, Nova, independent study, those kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely. Especially around, and I'll show you here. As we come down, we're having these discussions right now because auditions, I believe, our first round of auditions. I'm not sure how many they have, but they just happened for the new incoming students, and that is where we see these very large jumps. So right here we see 246, or we can go from the actual numbers, right? 218 incomings, eighth graders going into ninth grade becomes 286. Before that, 226 became 300, 253 to 354. We see on average about 80 if you add them all up and divide them out. We see about 80 new students coming into MSA, and our belief is that this year it's even better in terms of numbers. So that still is a very healthy program that draws students in from outside of the district. We're hoping to see those kinds of numbers come in for dual immersion at Linwood. Linwood is also one of our schools that has kind of the most amount of space in terms of their ability to house students. As I scroll up here, yeah, Linwood is basically our smallest school in terms of students, not the smallest school in terms of footprint. So we actually have a lot of opportunity there, and as we're seeing as the program stays stable, as we have great leadership, we're going to see that grow. I will say with big giant asterisks that you have a lot of people that are in that community that are affected by current, federal proclamations. And what does that do to this program in outgoing years? We don't know. Hopefully, it is able to stay very stable. And but as of right now, this one isn't. Linwood isn't a huge. The way that 80 to 90 students is a big number of students to come in, Linwood isn't seeing those kind of numbers yet. And then the other ones that you were talking about, Nova, those are usually internal kids. Nova and Marin Oaks, they're kids that are already enrolled or would be enrolled at one of our schools. So like I said, we hold them flat in the enrollment trend, because any one of those students that did or didn't come to those schools most likely came from Novato High or San Marin in the first place. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but Jeff's got a question.
Josh, I had two questions. First, just to say, I really appreciate the level of detail, and your Excel game is on point. We're considering if we have too much property, and this level of numbers and detail really helps. To clarify something, you had said that use the phrase possible student when looking at the line graph, the bar graph that you gave us. And so are we to assume this, for example, for 2930, 7,591 is kind of a max figure of possible students?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the ceiling.
That's sort of the idea that, hey, everything went exactly how numbers aligned.
Right.
and they all showed up in perfect little boxes, and here you are, right?
Right.
Not a single one of them chose private school instead of public.
Sure. And now, I don't know if are you going to get to the slideshow or something that we had received in an email as well?
Yes, that's next.
I'll
yes.
wait to mention that then later.
Sure. You said Control L. Yeah. Fantastic.
So some of you guys might know I was a school board trustee for 17 years, and it took a few years to get a handle on it, but I got to tell you that over time, that actually made sense to me. And I think it's also kind of important to I think, and would be respectful to say that I think we're very fortunate to have an individual like Josh working for us who works so hard on projections because it affects the budget in obviously money is very, very important, but there are other factors that we have to take into consideration, which are class size limitations that are worked in within our contracts with our teachers, and it is a very, very complex method, and what you've been looking at is an analysis on the future based on past trends, which is a way you can study the future. In fact, I'm trying to get Josh to work on my stock portfolio decision making, but this is his specialty here. So, but I think it's important that I think I'll share that the farther out you go with projections, the worse they are. The next year and the next year after that seem to be pretty realistic. Has been my experience, but as soon as you get into a fourth year projection and so forth, you really don't know what's going to happen. Pandemic, change in deportation, and there's just all kinds of reasons. And most of the studies that you will read and the studies that I've read over the years will basically admit that up front, that as the farther out you go, the harder it is to predict the future. So it's important that when you're looking at the blue chart, you do understand that that's really like a very, very optimistic, possibility when you get out to that final year. I will say that increases in enrollment is a good thing. We're a LCFF. We're based on average daily attendance, so the more students we have, the better. There was a comment about MSA, and we don't have any necessarily current information, but I did look up an old report, and we do get over 120. There's 126 kids come from outside our district to attend our schools. So we want all kids, as many as possible. So there's nothing that motivates us to keep kids away from the Novato Unified School District, whether they're early intervention or interested in attending one of our special academies. So what we've got here next is another way to sort of look at the future, and what we're required to do on a 5 to 8 year cycle is to basically do a justification study so that we can charge impact fees for the developments that actually get built in our community. So if someone builds something, we're going to assume there's going to be children along with that or additional services. So part of that development is a built-in cost to give to the school districts. I believe the cities charge development fees as well to help improve the capacity and the services for the future results of the increased population. So we have a study here. It's a school impact justification study focuses mostly on the construction question. So what we'd looked at before was trends based on what has happened in the past. This is a study that says, based on what's going to be built, we think these number of kids are going to be added to our school district. So rather than share the entire study with you, which has a lot to do with calculations and justifications on square footage and what square footage costs in construction and the different kind of construction, I sort of narrowed it down to just a couple of points that are most important, and that basically on a pure classroom size capacity level, we have room for 9,777 students. And that would be no extra rooms. We wouldn't have music rooms. We wouldn't have resource rooms. We wouldn't have places to store our old stage equipment and things along those lines. If we went went into that particular case. In my 17 years, I don't think we ever really topped 7,800, and we got pretty close a couple of times, but it's been 60 years since we've had such a high level of student population that we were above that 7,800 number. And again, a lot of that had to do with the baby boom concept and the exponential growth that people expected. I myself come from a family of 7 children. That doesn't happen very often anymore. So we can pretty much count on the way that things have leveled out. So this particular study basically is just telling us that at the time, study was done in May of last year, the city was projecting 2,972 new residential units. And then they go through sort of a single family analysis, and based on square footage, number of units, et cetera, they come up with essentially over a 20-year period, they sort of come up with a student generation rate, and that student generation rate is always sort of in this 0.29, 27, 28, depending on how the study is done. But in this particular case, the study tells us that based on the 2,972 units that are going to be constructed as of May of last year, there would be a generation of 871 K through 12 students. So over 20 years. So that doesn't mean we're going to get 870 kids on day one. Over 20 years, we're going to get 35 kids a year spread out over now TK through 12th grade. So based on the construction projections, there will be no large inundation, huge amounts of students coming into the district. So this is just another way to look at the growth in students that we're going to have. Since the study was done in May of last year, I basically pulled down the latest construction projects posted on the City of Novato website. I relisted them here, and using the same basic formula, I'm coming up with, there's fewer units being constructed, and one of the reasons for that is some of the projects that were on the prior study have been built, and we've already absorbed them. But so currently what's in the pipeline is just around 2,700 units, and using that generation rate, it's 790 kids that were expected to come into the district over the next 20 years, and again, spread out over K through 12th grade. So in another way, these two spreadsheets and these two generation reports are literally 6 or 7 months apart. So you can sort of get a general idea that things change all the time, every day. But this is what we have to work with, and going forward, I think we can say with a fairly high level of confidence that we're not going to have an exponential growth in student population that would require us to build an additional school, especially because we would probably expand on site. First of all, I'm going to show you, we already have capacity at all of our sites. Second, we can expand on each of our sites. And third, there's an option about redrawing the boundaries to shift students, to rebalance the districts, because there has been sort of a natural tendency of migration into the north districts, and a lot of this development you're looking at is going to be in the north part of Novato. So another way to rebalance is to move the boundary lines for the southern school sites northward, so that the school districts up here, or their areas, would become smaller. And this particular slide is derived basically from a capacity count that we had done by our construction management company. And these two boxes at the top kind of help, it's an oversimplification, but kids don't come all in neat packages, and based on the grade level, we have different maximum amount of kids that a teacher can have in their classroom. So TK through 3, there's a maximum of 25. 4th and 5th, it goes up to 30. Special daycare classes can only max out at 18, and then obviously I've got the average next to that shows it's a little bit lower than the maximum, is how we we do our best not to max out if we don't have to. When you get into secondary classes, which is the box on the right, that essentially is a different formula where each instructor has a maximum number of contacts or students they'll see per day, and it sort of works out to a maximum amount of kids per class based on the grade level. And I put PE in there because they're allowed to have a lot more students in their class per ed code than your basic core classes. So essentially what this graph is telling us is it basically tells us how many core classrooms each one of our sites have. And when you think of core, you would think of English, science, math, A through G type of classes. And then you have your non-core classes, which are the electives, or in the elementary school, it'd be a resource class and study hall or other miscellaneous uses. And then third column over is the number of classrooms that we have in each site. And using a formula that essentially takes into account sort of modern needs. For example, where schools are now taking on mental health as an issue. And I'm sorry if you guys have heard me say this before, but public education often gets asked to handle a lot of societies and cultural issues, whether that be transportation, whether that be feeding them. And in this particular case, it's mental health, and quite frankly, it looks like we're headed towards adding housing to help solve our cultural problems. So public education generally is the one that gets called upon to solve a lot of these problems. But taking into account sort of these additional needs that classrooms have, we tried to come up with each one of our sites of how many of those classrooms really are extra or that we couldn't use. For example, they're already vacant, or I mentioned before, there's theater things stored in there. Or we might have, in some cases, some classes have 3 classrooms set aside for special education when only 1 is necessary. So just sort of applying some basic logic along those lines, we determined how many extra classroom each site had. Then we just sort of created an average student per class times the number of extra classroom. And in the red, that basically shows each site today has a capacity to absorb a certain number of students spread out through all the grades for those particular campuses. So without doing anything, just rearranging and cleaning, and, making better use of the classrooms that we have, we can accommodate an additional 1,158 students. It's kind of, the situation is, if 2 people live in a 5-bedroom house, they're probably going to make use of all those rooms and do something with it. But later on in life, when they downsize and move into a smaller 3 bedrooms, this kind of sounds personal, but you don't need, it turns out 2 people really don't need 5 bedrooms. So what I'm getting at is we can find a way to make this work easily, because a lot of these extra classrooms are serving as storage, or they're doubling as specialty uses. So that's basically just the purpose here, is to show you that we're definitely in a position that we can easily absorb students as they come into the district, and we do want the growth. So, any questions on the information that I've provided based on the predicted construction pipeline, how we calculate the students, and then our actual site capacity? Juliet.
Yeah, I do have a question, because it seems like we're really, really out of balance with the north to the south, to the point that it might be difficult to move those kids around. If we're talking about 380 kids in San Ramon, even if we redistributed those to all the northern schools, that's not enough space. And if we're talking about that, I guess the San Ramon property, that's the old Fireman's Fund, is that the 317 students projection, that property?
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know, I'm just thinking transportation for those 317 students to go all over Novato is a little tricky.
Well, the students would be spread out, that number would be spread out K through TK, or TK through 12th grade, so it's not all elementary school students. So essentially, as that development comes online and we see things happening, and reason it's spread out over 20 years is that when people do move in, they don't necessarily move in with children. Children sort of come later, so there's more of a, you basically see it coming based on some of the work that you see Josh doing before. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly, but we would have to do, there's other things we could do, like right now we allow a lot of inter-district transfers. We let kids who live in the southern part of town go to school in the northern part of town. That's something that we could stop, for example, so we can accommodate the new kids that live in that area. So
I get that it's over time and it's not exact. It just when you look at those numbers compared to the extra capacity numbers, it seems like that might be an issue in the north.
It without a doubt, that sort of tends to be the migration. So those boundaries for those northern schools are going to have to get smaller. So you might live north central, but have to go south central to a south central campus. And that's not to say that we wouldn't take into account, well, maybe this looks like we can put a portable in or two portables in and we can accommodate it. But we would see at least 2 years back what's coming. Josh, a lot of times I refer to his production sort of like cohorts moving through, growing up and advancing through the system. So knowing that it's coming, we can make determinations, and that would be up to the board and the community to decide what's a better idea. Redo reboundaries or just add 4 portables somewhere. So I think, again, the purpose, I guess, of what we're looking at in the way of projection trends and enrollment, it's not to say that we don't have challenges ahead, but at no point does anybody seem to think that we're going to need to build a brand new middle school or an additional elementary school or any. I think that in itself would be over $20 million. The community would have to pay for it. It would be a 5 to 10 year process to do it. And those kinds of decisions generally don't get made unless you're in some of the suburban sprawl areas that still take place out in the valley, where huge ranches and farms are now turned into $5,000 to $8,000 homes, and then you build a school.
And Derek?
Yeah.
I think what it doesn't take into account is that this is all new construction, right? So it says, okay, new construction comes in, you have new population that comes with that construction. But all the construction around that continues to get older and older and older, and less children come out of the current San Marin neighborhoods, and the San Ramon Circle neighborhoods, right? Because those continue to get older and older and older, and are older populations that are in there. So it's one of the things that when we look at like new is what we want to see is what is expected on the year-to-year growth, and is that going to be a number that overwhelms? Most likely what we see here is that no, none of these numbers are going to overwhelm. And most likely, like, the trend is that it's probably going to cap out and then continue to go down. So any new construction will just help to level us back out to where we were.
Derek, question?
Yes.
You talked a bit about the impact fees that are collected for new development, and I know, there's just so much uncertainty with what's going on in the state, what the future of housing looks like in our county. But is it a safe presumption that new development, would generate new fees which would pay for any expansion to the existing district? In other words, to judge this as surplus, we need to see whether or not our current facilities are adequately sized for our current population and our current housing stock. Is that accurate?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, exactly. That is what impact fees are for. They are under the idea that every new development that is built at a certain point includes a child, and that child will then be a new student to Novato Unified School District, and will have to house them somewhere. So when you're talking about really like mega structures, which the only one that we're really talking about on this one is the Fireman's Fund, is that you can talk with them about actual like impact mitigation and what that would look like in creating safe routes to our schools and busing and all that. On the level that it normally hits the population is like when someone builds an ADU. We collect funds on that, so it's a much smaller amount, but over time builds up so that we are able to then add classrooms somewhere. And right now it does pay for, one of the things that it does pay for is portables that we are leasing. So it actually currently does that exact thing.
Great, thanks.
Of course you can.
And I'm curious about this because all the properties that are going to be developed on Grant Avenue and Landing Court are 100% affordable housing. So those properties will likely have a 55-year exemption for property taxes, which would include our parcel tax. What I don't know is if they still pay impact fees.
I would have to double check, so I'm going to say this with a little mark next to it that says Josh might not know what he's talking about. But for the most part, all impact fees are able to be charged unless negotiated otherwise to have some sort of equivalent, like I said, bus routes, things like that. The only thing that happens is that if they have a senior exemption, like they are put in place for senior living, like 65 and older, they can go down to the lower rate. They still pay, though. They don't pay zero. They just go down to their impact fees are at 3 levels, and they would go down to the lower rate. So we would still be collecting on them even if they are low-income housing. It would just be if they are senior only, because the idea would be that seniors aren't bringing children into the school system.
Right. I think that, so the answer to that is it's hard to be exempted from developer fees. In fact, more recent legislation has stated that they've delayed our ability to collect them from essentially permits to construct. We could collect them, and now they've changed that to occupancy before we can collect them. As far as property tax exemptions go, I think it's hospital, scientific, charitable. There's one other in there where you can get exempt from property taxes. But another thing about these affordable housing developments is they're studios, 1-bedrooms. So it's all designed to balance out in the end. But essentially, I think these are generous numbers, but based on some of them being the high density units they're really not likely to generate as many students as this potentially predicts.
I've just got some questions. So going back to the executive summary page, when you look at that number, the 2972, is that from the regional housing needs assessment? Is that where you grab that?
So
It's
this is
because that is Novato and Marin County. So it's
the parts of Marin County it includes are the parts that the school district include, which is Loma Verde.
Yeah.
And I think we encompass a few other county areas, but it's not the entire county. It's just the parts of the county that are within the school district.
Because Novato's RENA for the last housing cycle is 2090. So by my estimates, 882 of those units are in unincorporated. So just for clarification. That
very well probably accounts for the difference, yes.
And we will have another RENA cycle within the next 20 years because they run 7 or 8 years. I do want to just note, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a planning wonk. Spent 5 years on the Planning Commission. That's how I got to know that man over there. There's a couple of projects on this list that are already built. Atherton Place is fully built and occupied. That's on Redwood, right across from Trader Joe's. The Springbrook Green Homes, that's on Vallejo. Those are already built. And the workforce and veteran housing out at Hamilton, I believe the veteran housing is built. The workforce housing, I think it's built, but it may not be occupied yet. I just wanted to clarify that. And I think 15 Clausing Court is a Senate Bill 9. It's a lot split. So this is another thing that will come up in terms of housing growth. Senate Bill 9 allows a single-family home a property owner to do a lot split. And on that one lot, you can build a single-family dwelling plus an ADU. So it creates more density. I don't think the city's seen a lot of SB9 activity, but definitely a lot of growth in ADUs. And whether they're used for families with children that'll be seen. But I just wanted to note that on there. The other thing, in terms of San Marin, it went in at 1,081 units. They'd like to build more than that. So that project could be higher than that. They really would like to see 1,300 units around that. But in my lifetime, I keep waiting to see things happen. So no one should be holding their breath.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make those
No,
notes.
I appreciate it. And I think it's important that you have an opportunity to do that, because these numbers are in flux. They're always changing. And a lot of them are also estimation. You just brought up an example. The number 181 is not something that the developer said for certain that's what I'm going to do. It's a number that's based on what's allowed on a per square foot, per parcel, per acreage situation. So even these numbers are somewhat, estimates, and what actually happens is the future. But we have to go by something. So these are the tools that we're given, and we use the data that's available at the time. And though they move around a little bit, there's nothing here that says be prepared for 3,000 new students to come into the district. That would literally have to be building a new Terra Linda or a new San Marin or something like that. Okay.
Derek, if I may.
Yes, please.
So one other property on here, that's 1787 Grand Avenue, that's a senior assisted living facility, so I doubt there'll be any children coming to the school district from it.
So I'm glad, see, this is good that you're pointing it out, because I could take the time to go through all this, but essentially this is how it's done and how they use it. And obviously the senior assisted living facility is going to not generate kids,
But after that, in my brief look at this, the comment was already made. If you look at, so we're tasked with identifying two properties as surplus properties. I look at the development in the south end of town, nothing really impacts the property we're looking at down there. My concern is around San Ramon, because a lot of that development's on the north end of town, and that property, San Andreas property. But when I look at it, these numbers generate roughly 400 students. As you mentioned, that's across 3 campuses, assuming it's 1 elementary school, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. When you look at those 3 campuses, it's identified that there's 300 space for 300 additional students right now. Now, none of the kids come in these nice little packets so that they're going to balance out exactly that way. So let's assume that 300 number is 150 we have room for right now, which leaves about 250 students, which is 10 portable classrooms over 3 campuses. So it's not, and we've identified that most of those campuses have significant additional room to be able to handle portables. So going back to what Josh said, those numbers to me indicate that this, even if all of this happened, isn't going to impact that campus, the one that we're looking at right now, that site, so that we would need it to build a school to accommodate this. We have the room on the campuses that we have to handle this growth.
we think so.
I think so.
And
Well, based on these numbers.
right, and again, these numbers would have to be 10 times this amount before we would start to say something like, let's build a new school. Jeff?
And I was just looking at the map. It seems that, and from those projections of how many people come per development, that 777, the Fireman's Fund building is actually closer to Olive. So as you were talking about changing zoning lines to go north, you may, I don't want to put anyone in a bind, but you could move them in other directions as well. You don't have to only go north.
Well, you're right. In fact, Olive does now come across Novato Boulevard and into the central area, and
Right.
you're right.
It's about a half mile
It doesn't
shorter,
have to be just north-south, it can
according
be
to Google.
east-west as well.
I did have a question too, and Josh, maybe you can check my JV level math that I did here on the side. I was trying to gather, okay, what's our capacity for the elementary schools in total? What's our capacity for the middle schools in total the high schools in total. Because I know people have said, well, they closed Hill, so aren't the middle schools getting full? But what I saw is you've got about a capacity for about 2,000 middle schoolers currently, don't we? And we only have, a little over 1,200. Is that about what you think?
Yeah, I think what we do want to always caution when we're talking about that specific number is that is sort of like the sardine approach, right? Of like putting all the kids in all the rooms, and every room is just for education and nothing else. No fun can happen here.
Well, I didn't even add up the extra classroom line you had on that chart.
So like we always caution that, but yes, and like that's because it's like if we're talking about what the actual maxes are, now of course, because we want good education spaces, we would intervene before that. And the idea would be like, okay, you see that it's growing. Let's go out there and be looking at what sort of additional construction we can do, which is why I made the point to say that most of our campuses are really big.
Right.
And we have the space, whether it be portable or permanent building, to increase the size long before we ever needed a full new campus.
Yeah, I mean, from what I looked at, it just, again, sitting here doing it quickly, you've got so much space currently, you could double the size of a school that you already have, so it's of course spreading it out between the campuses, but yeah, so we've got a lot of space.
And I might just add that we're looking at these two parcels, but you brought up the Hill Education Center that it's occupied by 50% right now, so there's plenty of capacity out there as well. And then we have our Hamilton Air Base parcels that are blank spots as well. So so these decisions that we're making now, based on all of the sites and the properties that still remain, again, are just more justification that we can handle quite a bit of a growth before we would have to use these parcels.
Derek, I wanted to thank you guys for the details, especially looking at new construction and all. I think that's great work. But I also wanted to ask a question, something on what Josh touched on as well, and that is the older housing, the older population in those housing, and maybe our generation turning over at one point, and there's being a different trend in that older housing, where eventually the larger generation sells that property and a new generation comes in. Was that considered at all? Is there a possibility that the trends that we've been seeing for the last couple of decades turns around?
So I think I'll approach that from this. Traditionally, that sort of market analysis or demographic changing is built into the work that Josh basically showed you. Behind his numbers are based on historical happening. So is it picking up the generational changes and so forth? Probably very gradually. But you were at the advisory committee, the meeting, and we had that market analysis study that basically did show that there is going to, over time, there is going to be people, I'm trying to say the right politically correct word, but they're going to leave for one reason or another due to their age, and new people are going to move in, and those newer families basically, on average, are going to have smaller families or no families, but it's also projected to take another 30 years. So again, it's another very gradual changeover, and it's certainly, so I'm going to say, take a look at those slides and try to have some confidence as to how the county and Novato are changing as far as the price of housing is going up compared to the rest of the state. This is a really small amount of housing that's being built in relation to something else that study does. But I guess what you're trying to get at is as older people move out, new families come in, is that going to create an exponential growth in student population that we'll have to accommodate? And I would say that it's sort of already cooked into these numbers.
Thank you.
So I can answer that partly from our neighborhood. We have 11 houses on our cul-de-sac. We moved there 10 years ago. Counting our house, 4 of the houses have turned over, and those 4 houses have generated 1 child.
Yeah, that study, this is not really related to what we're talking about, but it's kind of like amazing to me for someone who's lived in Marin County as long as I have. But to get a traditional mortgage and to buy a median priced house in Marin County requires a household to have over $500,000 a year in annual income. So you're in good shape if you have one and you live here. But if you're a school district looking to hire and attract talent and to come in and teach your kids, it's very, very difficult to find a place to live in Marin. So yeah, there is one more page. I just wanted all those questions. So the next page basically just sort of sets up so bullet forms what we've been talking about, and what we're going to do at our next meeting is, and the input that you're giving us today, and I would encourage any of you guys, besides the questions that you've asked, to email me with any other thoughts, because what Jim and I will do, we'll draft a recommendation and an outline resolution for the Board of Trustees to consider. And so to date, basically what we've got here is historical and projected enrollment trends. These 2 properties have never been needed to accommodate student growth. We've had them for 74 and 58 years, and enrollment has remained stable, with a long-term toward decline. And I know you guys didn't see that, but essentially I think Josh basically did say once you get past that high point, we're probably going to expect a decline. And so when I say long-term, I mean more than 10 years out. And some of the things we've been talking about, how the new families generate fewer students, et cetera. So the work behind the information you're seeing definitely predicts long-term decline in enrollment. The existing school sites have a sufficient classroom capacity to absorb minor enrollment increases. Any future growth can be effectively managed through the installation of temporary portable classrooms as needed, or in boundary adjustments. Financial and logistical considerations are constructing a new school on either property would require $20 million, take 5 to 6 years to develop, and keeping the underused properties that we have now is neither fiscally nor educationally necessary. Going on from there, strategic responsible asset utilization. So the district should explore better ways for these land assets. For example, working strategic partnerships could lead to additional housing and revenue generation, and repurposing them for essential initiatives. Again, housing would be an initiative that we would be considering. And I kind of already mentioned that long-term, anything that we do and we develop on these properties as their debts get paid down, it could lead to significant revenue generation for the district. So in the end, based on historical and projected data in alignment with the district's management responsibilities, these 2 parcels should be formally declared as surplus property, and they should be repurposed for more productive and beneficial use to serve the community, is essentially how we've outlined the recommendation at this point. But that is staff assuming that you guys are in agreement with this, and it's now time to talk about the next meeting, and if there's any questions about whether or not anyone thinks that these properties shouldn't be declared surplus, and then I would and staff would do the work necessary to find out if those concerns were justified or valid. So I'm not sort of seeing anything at this point. you have, you don't have, do it now. Like I said, you can, if you have questions that come up later, you can send me an email, et cetera. But this is what we'll be doing. Our next meeting is, we'll send you as more of a written narrative recommendation. And then I think we're going to put together a resolution as well, which is sort of a formal way that public entities make declarations and move forward. Yeah, there'll be backup that goes with the recommendation that we'll call it a report. Yes. Okay. So did I forget anything? Did I forget anything else? But so that's where we're at. So it's up to you guys if you have any more questions, want to go over anything else, or.
So just a question then, will you be looking to this committee just saying, yes, we are in support of this?
That's correct.
Okay. And I would just make a recommendation because I have not gone out to the Hamilton site, and I would just encourage everybody to go look at both sites, just to look at them physically so you have an idea of the context surrounding them. It just makes it little something I learned as a planning commissioner years ago. It just sometimes it formulates new questions for you. So
I think that's an excellent suggestion to actually walk the perimeter of San Andreas. It's probably pretty muddy out there these days.
Pretty muddy, but.
And then the child care center, you can easily drive up, enter from Navi Drive, and then just kind of go up Tinker Way and turn around and come back, and you can kind of see what they're doing there. But that's a great suggestion, and again, encourage you guys to do as much as possible. But based on what we've done so far, this is what staff is recommending. But of course, and then these again are just bullet points. So if you guys have other ideas, you want to say something else, other kinds of comments that you would like to have built in, it'll be worked out amongst you at the next meeting as to what points you want to put across to the board.
So any more questions? Okay, so if I can go back, two housekeeping things. I wasn't in my normal environment, so I forgot to actually take a vote. So we got, on the approval of the agenda, we got a motion and a second, but I didn't ask everyone for all in favor. So if all in favor could say yes. Anyone opposed? Okay, so all in favor. And then also on the approval of the minutes of the January 15th meeting, if we could do the same, we did have a motion and a second, so all in favor. Anyone opposed? All in favor. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not in my proper element.
It's a good thing you don't have to take a vote for adjournment, but that.
Oh, yeah. So I guess with that, if there's nothing else, then we'll move to adjournment. And just to remind everyone, our next meeting is February 26th. So we look forward to seeing everyone there. And Ross will be back, and he'll be sitting in this seat. Thank you all so very much.
Yes, thank you all.
Close the meeting.
Bang.